Well, and welcome to all our usual listeners and viewers. This is Going Viral show for February 1st, 2022, Tuesday. I'm Alexander Stavropoulos. With me, we have Dennis Goldstein, Victor Walis, and Ken Aaron. And Jim Dingman may be joining us. I'm in, Manhattan, New York. Ken's out in California near LA. Dennis is in Morris, New Jersey, and Victor is out there in Massachusetts. All right, so let's get to some of the news of the day and start off. New president in Honduras, their first female president ever, Xiomara Castro. And so this is an Al Jazeera clip.
Tegucigalpa, as Xiomara Castro, a former First Lady of Honduras, was sworn in to become the country's first female president.
Queridas hermanas y hermanos.
Dear sisters and brothers, Honduran people, the presidency of the Republic had never been assumed by a woman in Honduras. 200 years have had to pass since the declaration of our independence.
City streets throughout the capital, Tegucigalpa, closed for a parade to celebrate the historic inauguration. Many expressed their hopes the country may finally turn a page after more than a decade of single-party rule, marred by scandal and political turmoil that have fueled a historic wave of migration.
We hope that she will deliver that which we've been hoping for years, that people will no longer migrate to other countries, that people will stay and have decent employment, because we all have a right to that, and it's what a majority of the people expect, to stay in their country. Nobody wants to be away from their home, and that is what she will accomplish.
Dozens of high-profile guests were also in attendance, including U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, who seeks to strengthen a bilateral partnership with Honduras to address the root causes of migration from Central America.
Poverty has increased by 74% to turn our country into the poorest in Latin America. This statistic in itself explains the caravans of thousands of people who flee north towards Mexico and the United States.
While the mood here in the capital city is that of celebration, Inauguration Day is taking place under a backdrop of a political crisis in the Honduran National Congress.
Legislators, however, appear to have at least temporarily put aside the political standoff to allow citizens to celebrate the peaceful transfer of power. President Xiomara Castro ran on an anti-corruption platform, promising an overhaul of the country's legal system. Her ability to govern effectively, however, will ultimately depend on finding common ground with her political opponents in the Honduran legislature. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Tegucigalpa.
All right, so that's both. Of course, there's Honduras has many, many problems that she's going to have to deal with. It's interesting that, well, so far, even though the U.S. participated in the coup that overthrew Xiomara Castro's husband, Manuel Zelaya, back, I think it was 2009. So far, they're expressing support, or the new Biden administration is, which may be because they're wising up that, hey, if it's a bad idea to destabilize these Central American countries, because that's why we get all those migrants, and that then we get troubles on our borders. So maybe if we can help, the U.S. can help Honduras to become a more stable, economically prosperous country, that's good for us too. Although, well, we'll see how things go along. Again, there's a very entrenched oligarch class, including a bunch of, there's the involvement of the former government of Juan Orlando Hernandez in literal drug trafficking. The president's brother, I forget his first name, also Hernandez, is in jail in the U.S. on drug charges. And everybody, well, almost everybody believes, again, the former president is also part of the drug network. And of course, there have been hundreds over the years, thousands of people killed in Honduras, including by, the usual right-wing death squads, funded and trained by the U.S., So, Honduras is going to have a lot of problems to deal with, but at least now they have a government that wants to basically change things for the good. And of course, always good to have, more women in government.
Why?
Well, because diversity, just like, it's important to have people from different backgrounds more. That means, besides the usual white guy, over and over, because they have different life experiences. And again, it's of course white men for the most part who've been ruining, people from the basically, Spanish families who've been ruining Honduras for, its entire history. So maybe they can do better with a woman. But Victor or Dennis, have you any thoughts about what might be going on here in Honduras and, in general about Central America, what this might represent?
Well, I just see it as part of the trend that's coming back again of more progressive victories, like the one in Chile, the one a year or two ago in Bolivia, the one in Peru. And so it's encouraging at one level. I don't know if it's going to go any further than the previous time. And of course, the countries that have gone the furthest, Venezuela has come under terrible attack, and I fear the same again. It's not the last time this has happened. So I don't know what to say. I don't have
one and
of the Honduran army, for example.
No. Again, there are forces against her, but to what you were saying, Victor. One of the things the new government immediately recognized Maduro's government of Venezuela, so they reestablished relations. So, which suggests a more inter-American, I don't know about alliance, but that they're not just taking the U.S. government line of not recognizing Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, which a number of other countries follow. But Dennis, you have any thoughts? You have to unmute, I think. Dennis? If you're still muted, I think, Dennis. Yeah, you got to unmute yourself. I think you're still muted, Dennis. Gotta hit the button.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, Dennis. Yeah, so go on.
Essentially, I agree with Victor. I would say that that they're part of the process in Latin America, which is going to free itself from U.S. imperialism. Mm-hmm. It's a long, hard struggle and process, but that's what's happening. U.S. imperialism is weakening. The U.S. is in a structural crisis. Capitalism is in a structural crisis, which means they're not going to get out of it. And the sooner we build a socialist movement and win some revolutions, the better off we are. Otherwise, it's just going to be going on for a long time. And the problem is global warming.
Right.
As long as we have global warming, we have to change to eco-socialism quickly. But it's really a long, drawn-out process that we're in right now. And if we didn't have global warming, I'd say, well, maybe in 100 years, things will have changed significantly. Maybe in 50 years, maybe in 25 years. But we have a very short space of time to do something about stopping global warming. And I'll just leave it at that.
Right, which will, of course, in fact, affect Central America more than most because they're in a tropical region. So those are some areas that could literally become unlivable in some climate scenarios. But Ken, what are your thoughts on Honduras?
Mostly that sounds very good to me. Looks like an intelligent person. I looked it up. Honduras only has about 10 million people in it.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
small population, about
right. All
less
yeah.
smaller population than Brooklyn.
Smaller than Nicaragua, I think.
Smaller than Brooklyn, isn't it?
No, oh no, Brooklyn is like 2 million.
Oh, okay. Well,
Remember
Manhattan.
well, New York City is 8 million, I think, still, or somewhere around there.
Okay, so it's like comparable to the population of New York, or
Yeah, I mean, the whole tri-state area are like 20, 25 million.
right. So I think the key thing is the core things in the country are education and work, industry,
Wow.
what they can do to make money.
Crime too is important again because of the drug dealing.
Oh, that's a problem.
That could derail things and corruption in general.
Is Honduras known? I don't know. Is Honduras known as a source point?
It's a transit. It's one of those transit areas like Mexico where the drugs go through.
Okay. From Colombia?
Yeah. They're not grown for the most part, but they go through, yeah. Colombia mostly, yeah.
So, well, okay.
It goes back to the 60s and 70s, I think.
But hasn't been relieved by the legalization of marijuana in the States?
Well, cocaine's not legal, so, and heroin and so on. So there are other drugs always.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't followed that. So that's the main, you feel that's the main issue more than.
Well, that's a big issue. I think the bigger issue is the party that's leaving power. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of economic power. They have a lot of rich people associated with them. And again, there was a coup against her husband. That when there was a previous progressive government, mostly because he was making moves to ally Honduras with Chavez in Venezuela. They literally told them, I think, at one point that they couldn't join this ALBA economic alliance that Chavez had started. And so, well, when he didn't listen to them, they literally had the military grab him and put him on a plane and fly him out of the country, and established a military dictatorship. And then they installed this Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's basically a goon. And they've been killing hundreds of. They've had huge demonstrations over the years. They killed hundreds of these civil society people.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. The question is the U.S. or any other country have a military interest in Honduras?
Oh yeah, U.S. has a base.
Wait a minute. Do you think Victor knows on that? Is that something Victor would know?
I don't know, Victor.
Based there.
Yeah. Oh, that was the other thing.
Let's get Victor in. What?
No, I don't know that much more in detail, but I mean, all the time that the Contra War was being waged against Nicaragua, they were using Honduras as a base area, and they had several thousand U.S. troops stationed there. Now, I haven't heard whether they've been withdrawn. I think I would have heard, but so as far as I know, they're probably still there. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about Central America in connection with the environment. A very interesting development I heard about in El Salvador, which is that they had such a massive demonstration against the prospective Canadian, I think it was gold mine, some kind of mine. They actually passed a law outlawing all mining of any kind in El Salvador.
Really?
Which is the first. I'd never heard of such a thing.
Yeah. We could use that, everywhere.
Okay, but so you don't know whether or not they still have a base there with the U.S.?
No, I'm pretty sure that they do.
They probably do. It would be very surprising if they withdrew it.
No, because actually I can distinctly remember Max Blumenthal in the Gray Zone. They went to Honduras and they took video outside the base. This is like 2 years ago that they did this. So I can't imagine the U.S. left since then. So, yeah.
Okay, well, looking it up, it's called Soto Cano Air Base.
Yeah.
Also known as the Palmarola Air Base in Honduras, just south of Comayaca, something like that. And has 600, wait a second, between just 500 to 600 troops.
Right, but a lot of them are special forces. So
Okay, great enough.
And those Green Beret guys,
So the U.S. has an excuse to invade, right?
Well, they've done it I think, well, I mean, you have to go back to the 20s or 30s, but I'm pretty sure we invaded them back then, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, all that Smedley Butler gunboat diplomacy kind of stuff that
Okay.
went on.
Hey, Alex, what else you got?
Okay, so let's move on to our friend Boris Johnson, and let's play two clips. One about
Black Door, Sue Gray's crunch findings, more biting than expected. The report talks of high standards not being met by those setting the rules, of excessive alcohol consumption in the workplace and gatherings without clear authorization or oversight. Some behavior, she said, was difficult to justify against the backdrop of the pandemic. With nothing overtly critical of Johnson himself, it's perhaps not the big takedown his rivals hoped for. A contrite Prime Minister appearing in front of Parliament, promising to overhaul Downing Street and clean up government, but no talk of stepping down.
And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. I get it, and I will fix it. And I want to say to the people of this country, I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted.
Sue Gray had been planning to release a fuller report until London's Metropolitan Police stepped in, calling for her to pare down her findings while they carry out their own criminal investigation into 12 gatherings, including an alleged party in Johnson's flat. For Johnson's opponents, it isn't just about what's in the Sue Gray report, but what's not in it. For his fiercest critics, they will have to wait for the results of the police investigation to find out more about the most serious offences that could cause the most harm to Johnson's political career. But the results of that investigation could be many, many months away.
Even now, he is hiding behind a police investigation into criminality, into his home and his office. The British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign.
But it's not just the opposition that's been ramping up pressure on Johnson. Some of his own MPs have been quietly plotting against him. Other familiar faces are determined to hold his actions to account.
What the Gray report does show is that Number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
Monday saw a flurry of announcements by Number 10 on the economy, Brexit and Ukraine. This is a government eager to steer attention away from recent scandals. But when it comes to Partygate, there are still more truths to uncover. Heads, including the Prime Minister's, may yet roll if enough members of his own party decide it's time for him to go.
Okay, so let's play the one on Ukraine. This is from France 24, sorry. Deutsche Welle for a minute.
He stepped out of the heat of a possible leadership challenge back home. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson putting Partygate behind him for a short while and traveling to Kiev to show support for Ukraine in the face of that Russian troop buildup at the border. The UK's been among Kiev's staunchest NATO supporters in this crisis, shipping anti-tank missiles, sending military instructors. Let's cross to correspondent Gulliver Cragg, who's in Ukraine's capital. Gulliver, what's the latest where you are?
Well, we're just waiting for Boris Johnson and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to come out and speak to the media, but we're not really expecting any surprises after their short bilateral meeting. Boris Johnson is here to show the UK's support for Ukraine and perhaps to enjoy for a few hours at least being in a city where he is clearly rather more popular at the moment than he is in London. Ukrainians have been piling praise on the United Kingdom for its swift swift response to the pressure coming from Russia with all these troops massed outside the border for sending weapons, particularly those anti-tank missiles. The Ukrainian social media have been full of memes praising the United Kingdom and denouncing Germany for refusing to send weapons. So I think that Boris Johnson's approval ratings here in Kiev are really riding high. And Volodymyr Zelensky also today, actually in a speech to the Ukrainian parliament, was talking about the solidarity from Ukraine's Western allies, trying to stress that there is no division between different allies of Ukraine. And he pointed to the fact that there are so many high-level visits happening in Kiev at the moment, particularly this week. Boris Johnson is not the only Prime Minister visiting Kiev this week. The Prime Ministers of the Netherlands and Poland will also be here, and also the Turkish President.
Why is it that the UK is, I guess you could say, ahead of the curve when it comes to NATO allies going all in and supporting Ukraine?
I don't want to comment on the relationship between the internal political situation in the United Kingdom and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's decision to suddenly show quite so much support for Ukraine and send so much aid. But I think that the United Kingdom does also have a somewhat different analysis of the situation than some other NATO allies, in the sense that Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, put this the most bluntly. The whole NATO thing to them is a straw man. What this is really about principally is Vladimir Putin's need for influence over Ukraine, and that's why the United Kingdom, I think, perhaps is more on the same page as the Ukrainians in this, in thinking that Vladimir Putin needs to be stopped in Ukraine and he needs to be dissuaded by a strong military position for Ukraine, and that's why they think that sending weapons will help.
And once again, with each passing day, it sounds like a similar story. More troops on the the Belarusian side of the border, positioning themselves north of where you are. But at the same time, a telephone call between the Russian foreign minister and the U.S. Secretary of State, Sergei Lavrov, saying the U.S. is, quote, ready to discuss Russia's security concerns. Standing where you are in Kiev, what's the feeling?
I think the feeling is that the more the Russians talk about further diplomatic efforts, the more one gets the impression that they are not quite sure how to respond, and that they are perhaps genuinely looking for a way to out of this diplomatically. I mean, yeah, every day that they don't attack and that they schedule dates for more negotiations is a day that the Ukrainians can at least have a bit of a breather and know that they're not going to attack tomorrow.
Many thanks, Gulliver Cragg, who's getting ready to follow that press conference between the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his host, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
See right there, first of all, with the first clip, I mean, you can tell Theresa May was loving sticking her knife into, you know, the back of the man who got rid of her.
Hi, I'm Charles Fain.
On
TV, I report on the market.
Okay. Yeah, so that's again on the domestic politics of the UK, of course, and they're clear, you know, I won't hold back like the France 24 guy. You obviously, part of this, certainly Boris Johnson going to the Ukraine is basically Operation Distract from Partygate. That's, you know, he could have supported the Ukrainians with, you know, do a Zoom call with Zelensky. The reason to go over there is to show, well, he's being presidential, as they say. He's, you know, showing the flag. He gets to be nationalistic. He gets to, you know, shift things over to, you know, foreign policy crisis, which, you know, generally makes the government, people rally around the government. That's a natural tendency with, you know, any kind of nationalism. So, you know, but, yeah. Victor, what are your thoughts on women? I can't think commenting too much before, but what kind of odds do you give Johnson of surviving this whole Partygate thing now? You think it's the end of him eventually?
I really don't know. I'd rather comment on the Ukraine.
Okay, yeah, we'll do so then. Yeah.
That's what I find more concerning and more alarming. And again, I think the segment you showed is typical of the Western media, in that they're focusing overwhelmingly on the Russian troop movements and so on, and not looking into or recognizing the background of the U.S. role in pushing the expansion of NATO, because as you all know, the agreement back in 1990 of not expanding eastward has of course been broken dramatically. And I mentioned some interesting things that I heard. I think it was on this morning's Democracy Now! Show. One of them was the observation by the German peace activist to the effect.
Oh, I have that clip, Victor.
Yeah, that the Russian troops are apparently, according to him, 350 kilometers away from the border. It's not as though they're right there, but poised to invade. And the other thing was an observation made by Juan Gonzalez to the effect that, well, they talk about 100,000 Russian troops on their own territory, and the U.S. has 320,000 troops in Europe. And so I mean, I think we have to really focus on the aggressive posture that's being taken by the U.S. and that's being supported, or at least not opposed, even by relatively progressive members of the U.S. Congress. I mean, there needs to be a big public outpouring in this country of opposition to all the moves to ramp up tensions in that area.
Right. Well, I don't use in the first part, from Democracy Now! I think, when they have Medea Benjamin on, I think they're going to start demonstrations, Code Pink, against the war, stop the war, kind of. So hopefully that can lead, hopefully groups like the Answer Coalition can organize. So Dennis.
They're hoping for February 5th to have all over the country.
Yeah. So Dennis, what are your thoughts on either Partygate or Ukraine? Is Dennis muted? I think you're unmuted, Dennis.
The Americans are the aggressors. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I mean the military-industrial complex wants war, or they want, maybe they don't want an atomic war, but they certainly want these, they like it when there's a possibility of war, because it jacks up the military-industrial complex. And I would say our job is to de-escalate militarism in this country, imperialism and the military-industrial complex. And we have to build a movement of movements that is doing something like that. And I go back to the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. I think we can do as well or better, but we have to do something about stopping the militarism in this country.
No, we had millions before the Iraq War. I mean, with the biggest anti-war demonstrations in all of human history, were 24 million people around the world who demonstrated before Bush invaded. Unfortunately, nothing came of that, of course. But yeah, so it shows what can happen. And to what you're saying about the military-industrial complex, again, I think also on Democracy Now! They're mentioning there was some kind of Zoom call with I think it's the CEO or president of Raytheon, who was saying, of course, yeah, this is great for the weapons industry. They, this is a business opportunity for them to sell a lot of stuff to not just to the Ukraine, but to other countries in Eastern Europe to arm them against the Russians. But Ken, what are your thoughts on either story?
Yeah. Well, what seems clear to me is in America. Oh wait, I gotta unpin you, I think. That's strange. There we go. In America, the positioning has been set up PR-wise. The Ukrainians are suffering from threats from Russia. That's the scenario. It's not like we got to stop the Ukrainians from beating up Russia. It's Ukraine's is the victim position. So anybody who gets on the side of assisting Ukrainians is going to have an advantage in American politics on the, on the neoliberal level of the general population. Oh, the poor Ukrainians, they're good people. And Putin's a bad guy, and he's a mean guy. So that's that. And but coming back to and I still don't think anything's going to happen. They're just jockeying for position and, negotiation and everything like that. I don't think there's going to be any hot war, because it's too expensive.
We should all hope not, yeah.
Too expensive for the Russians. The other question, and in terms of finance, and also in terms of international relationships, because they do have relationships with other countries, and they're sending gas all over Europe and so forth. So, you know, they don't want to,
Yeah, they want to mess with.
you know, boil the dinner in the pot. Anyhow, the one thing, though, is interesting with Boris Johnson, if he's been having like even more than 4 parties without masks, okay, that's good news in a sense. Even though they're not sharing it with the general public, they somehow have beaten COVID-19. And
Well,
eventually, that technology or whatever pills they're taking or whatever they're doing that allows them to cohabit without masks.
but Ken, remember, not Boris, but didn't his advisor, like, was it Dominic's Rob? I think he got COVID. So maybe, you know, I mean,
know,
again, I didn't follow who in the cabinet got COVID,
Well,
but if we were to look into that, we might find that some did. I don't know. I just haven't heard.
I know this. I know NPR in the U.S. and most of the legacy media, CNN and MSNBC, supports the government's mandates and vaccines and everything. Watch out!
Right.
Get your 5-year-olds have to get.
You're a
5-year-olds have to. Hey, I'll let me finish. 5-year-olds have to get vaccinated. So that's supported by the legacy media, including NPR. Yet, I have not heard any commentary about the massive attendance to the football games that go on all over the country, where there's 30,000 people rubbing elbows without masks, shoulder to shoulder, and it's, you know, it's outdoors. Yeah, but it's lots of people coming in and out of the stadium. And I don't know why the legacy media hasn't been reporting about these super spreader events creating big surges in contamination. I don't know why. And so I'm just saying there's something that we're not being told. That's all. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Well, I
don't
assume
know.
you saw your own governor getting busted at the 49er game with Magic Johnson without a mask. And,
there you go.
you know.
They were French kissing too. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? So something's going on that they don't tell us about. And AOC and everybody, you know, she pulled it in.
Well, we should talk about it with Steve tomorrow, since he's a medical expert. There's a whole new article in the Times that's kind of scary about how, well, the thought that, well, Omicron doesn't end COVID, and we could always get a variant that, you know, is both infectious and completely defeats the vaccines. So they're playing up the idea that, well, it's not over COVID.
That's cheerful.
It'll always be here, but it'll always. And one other guy was pointing out, the guy who was, I think it's John Barry, who wrote the big book, very good book on the Spanish flu. I forget, The Great Influenza, I think is the book. It's an excellent book. Everybody should read it. Points out that there was a 4th wave in, I think, 1920 that actually killed, at least in the U.S., killed quite a lot of people. So there's always, you know, you could always have a later variant that, you know, is quite deadly. So, so they're just warning again in the Times that, we still need to be concerned, etc.
Well, I think there's one other aspect or metric of the COVID contamination or a pandemic that we're not getting reported, and it should be coming from the Wall Street Journal. How much money is Pfizer and
they're making a lot. Was it Pfizer was $33 billion last year?
Yeah.
But
so these guys are going
to you choose a clip now.
All right.
It's not some more, but you pick a clip for your list.
Okay. 1 second. Let's see if I can find the clip that I already picked. No, I don't have it here. 1 second. Well, if I said 1 second, but I don't have it. 1 minute. Maybe it's up here. No. This is it. Yes, I've got it. Okay, so let me share screen, and here it comes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
Let me make sure my.
This is a fun one.
Share my.
Who is this from, Ken?
Who's writing it?
Is it
Ottawa.
from an outlet or? Oh no, it's somebody on the street who's
I don't
filming.
know. It's
okay.
No, it's got a sign that says Ottawa. I don't know. Let me make sure you get this.
No, but full screen it. We're seeing it. Yeah.
I'll talk over this. This is the Freedom Rally.
Yeah, this is to freak out Trudeau. Was it the longest trucker convoy in history or something? They're not so good government. Go back a little. I want to see what their sign about Trudeau said.
Okay, now let me give you the other part of this.
Hiding out, huh? Oh, you gotta unmute. It's muted though, Ken. You gotta, yeah. Oh, you might want to read it. Different location. Love the hammer and sickle.
This convoy is all about freedom. It's not only with the truck drivers, it's actually for every single person. You, me, buddy down the road, it doesn't matter. It's all about your free choice. That's what it should be. Like I said, if you're vaccinated, cool. You did it. Well, most people did it because of work, but you know, you should do it off of free will, off of your own choice.
Across the border, and it makes things tough, that's for sure. Even being around Ontario, things are difficult. You can't get food, you can't get water, you gotta have a mask. If you don't have your mask, you can't go into stores, you can't do anything, and just like things to be normal again.
It can be hard to feeling.
All right. Well, might be a bit of an overreaction from the Canadian government. I think sometimes with those kinds of things it's better to, not play into the other side by making a big deal of it. I mean, and always, you hear, oh, there's, when they had, I don't know if you saw, Ken, but, they had a decently large, I think it was like 20,000 people protest against the mandates in D.C. And there too, I think the D.C. mayor warned that, the protesters could be violent, not only, but there were these stupid rumors about, the protesters were going to go into, restaurants unmasked for some reason. And, and of course, none of that actually happened. So it turned out to be just fear mongering in that case by, but yeah, so, but, obviously this is a thing. I mean, it also reminds me of, I don't know if you guys remember back a few years ago, I think it was when Holland was prime minister of France. They're introducing some laws against, in agriculture, and basically the French farmers went on a rampage. They drove into Paris with their tractors and literally dumped shit, on like in front of the presidential building in the parliament to make a point. And, well, the French are always good with protests, and they basically stopped the whole attempt to. But Ken, you're muting us all, I think. You muted yourself, Ken.
I muted myself instead of muting you. Okay, hey Victor, what do you think about that protest?
Oh well, I think it's a big issue, like it is in the United States. I guess my main feeling about it is the attitude of objecting to any kind of public health guidelines is what bothers me. Because I think that there's a rational part of it which has to do with all the say the financial pressures behind the vaccine stuff, which we've talked about before. But that seems to be something that really needs to be properly debated without fear of censorship. But the reaction against any and all regulations governing masks and distancing and so on is that's sort of the right-wing element of the whole thing. And I think one of the most unfortunate things is that the policy, which I gather is similar in Canada to what it is in the United States, has in fact played into the hands of the right, because the right has sort of picked up on legitimate grievances, and the left is sort of frightened of it, and so more political gain is being made by the right in this context. But in terms of the Washington demonstration that you mentioned, Alex, I think what was striking about it was the way the crowd, in fact, as my sense of it from watching some interviews with the crowd, it ran the whole full political spectrum, and in that respect, it carries to me some kind of promise, as does even the figure of Joe Rogan, who I contrary to the previous impression I had, I don't see as strictly right-wing. He's right-wing in some aspects, but not totally. And we need to be open to seeing to what extent it's possible to build on the popular protest. The same phenomenon that we witnessed in 2020, when people who voted for Sanders and then were sort of repressed within the Democratic Party, and they ended up voting for Trump. And it's the idea that people with the desire to have the kind of programs that Sanders would put in would vote for Trump is just so absurd, and yet that's what happens in practice. And what the question of what we as the left can do to break through those boundaries, and while empathizing and sympathizing with their discontent, showing that their analysis is wrong and needs to be taken in a different direction, needs to target the real sources of the problems. And I think, again, to some extent, Kennedy's book is a useful tool for giving you the instruments to do this, but it's being the censorship against it and the failure to review it has also posed a problem, because a lot of people are not willing to touch that. So that's how I see the issue.
I just want to follow up with one thing, Victor. Do you think that there's a danger, in the U.S., Canada, or any other country, of a totalitarian control mandating who can shop and who can go into a restaurant according to government access? Like you got a permit, you're allowed to go in and buy something, and you're not allowed to go in here. And that's a gradient scale. Of course, it's going to start with you can't go into ice skating ring, and then it's going to accelerate, and then it gets up to a point now where you can't go into a supermarket, maybe you can't go into a public bathroom, you can't go to school unless you have a vaccine, and that's going to be controlled by a gatekeeper, one person like a Fauci or somebody else who says, no, we're not ready, or yes, we are, or these guys are okay and those aren't. It isn't going to be voted on by a council or anything. So in terms of totalitarian control, do you think that these protesters have a valid cause?
The question is, what is totalitarian? I mean, what I call for is the removal of censorship, completely free debate. So it's not that we don't need to have guidelines, because for public health reasons, you need to have guidelines. That doesn't make it totalitarian. The question is whether the guidelines are set and imposed as a result of it, as the outcome of a democratic process in which there's a free debate and respect for the evidence and all that kind of thing. That's what's lacking. And if you have that, then you can have the necessary guidelines, and it's not a matter of it's being totalitarian as long as there's a democratic process.
But the U.S. Supreme Court just decided that the mandate for businesses over 100 people to require vaccination, otherwise you can't work there, was unconstitutional or inappropriate or whatever. They voted against it. And they approved a mandate for healthcare workers because they considered that it was functional, but not functional in other jobs.
Right.
So there is a question there. At least that was 9 people discussing it, as opposed to just the head of the CDC or something like that, or the POTUS, So it's a question of, I think most people would agree with you, it's got to be decided in a diplomatic, democratic fashion, to some degree.
Yeah, involving everybody, being well informed. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Dennis, what do you think? Is this a capitalist conspiracy or something?
We can hear you, Dennis. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go on.
I think that I'm not sure on this one, but the question, the way I put it is, the capitalist system is in a structural crisis, and lots of things are happening around that structural crisis. And we don't necessarily have to understand every little aspect of every little thing that's happening to know that the world is not going to get over the structural crisis of capitalism until we change to eco-socialism. And that's what the contradiction is between fascism and socialism. And what the capitalist class will support is authoritarianism, known as fascism. They will not support socialism. Socialism will have to be fought for by people who are ready to fight for it and who understand ideologically the situation.
Dennis, I'm not understanding you. Are you saying that a minority of the population could implement socialism without consent of the majority?
No, it's impossible. Socialism requires democracy.
Okay. All right.
So I would say no. It's up to the people to fight for a new system. I knew, well, at least my perception was This is like in the mid 70s, 1970s, when I was running an organization called the Council for Social Development. I knew that we needed a radical revolutionary change. It hasn't come. It could never come. But the point is that the way to solve the problems is not within the system, but by changing the system to something else. And that something else could be, from the capitalist standpoint, fascism. From a socialist standpoint, ecological socialism. And the reason I say ecological is because we have to solve global warming, or else we're all through. Okay.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Dennis. Hey, Alex, what do you think about those Canucks up there going crazy with the trucks?
I mean, you know, it's something some of the truckers down here, though, I think more of them in the US responded by just basically stopping, saying that they're not going to work. Or, you know, again, remember the bus drivers in, I think it was Chicago, who stopped working when they imposed the vaccine mandate on them. So here it's had an effect on, you know, it's been part of the supply chain issues that, you know, people who don't want to be vaccinated didn't, you know, stop working as truckers basically. And, you know, essentially went on a kind of strike against the, you know, so we've had.
That sounds backwards. The mandate was get vaccinated or you can't drive the truck.
Right. So they just stopped working. They're like,
no, they were told they couldn't work unless they had a vaccine.
Yeah. So they're like, we just won't work then.
No, but it was other people striking who were vaccinated, but were truck drivers supporting the people who weren't.
Right. There is that. Yeah. And I think there have been some, vaccinated truckers who also, I mean, well, certainly we haven't had a convoy like this here in the U.S., but people may get an idea now. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a bigger trucker convoy to D.C. at some point.
Well, we've always had people like Jehovah's Witnesses who won't get blood transfusions.
Right.
We have people
are allowed to opt out. There's always the religious exemption too. Yeah.
I think we got 70% of the U.S.
population. I think Christian Scientists can, and certain other groups who don't. Yeah.
And we've had political groups that won't pay taxes, right?
Right. Yeah. The Bundys and.
But the big one is we got 70% of the U.S. population is obese, so they won't stop eating donuts.
No.
You know, and so maybe they should get a card that says, "Well, you're not obese. You can go buy a donut."
Right.
You see, so it gets.
Well, that definitely makes COVID. That's a comorbidity for COVID. So.
Yeah, that's right. You don't even need.
I'm sure it'll be interesting to. I'm sure somebody will eventually do it, but to do like a statistical survey for how many COVID deaths can you attribute to obesity comparing the U.S.?
No, excuse me. The CDC, the head of the CDC said with Omicron, 75% of the deaths were people who had 4 comorbidities.
Right, comorbidities. Yeah.
75%. So, you can outlaw not exercising or eating too much sugar. You could boycott the sugar companies. There's lots of things you could implement. And maybe it's a good idea. That's kind of the way they operate in China.
Mm-hmm.
This is bad. Stop it. So you got another video, or you
want?
I'm going to take my leave at this point.
Okay, Victor. It was good to have you on as always.
Thanks, Victor.
Good to see you all. Carry on.
Okay.
Thanks as always, Victor. It's good to have you. All right. So let me. I would first ask. Well. Ken, do you have any Irish ancestry in you? Well, of course, well, you guys might have a more direct memory of that. Again, wasn't born yet, but have done quite a bit of research. Actually, research. After I saw Paul Greengrass's excellent movie Bloody Sunday, which did, I thought, a pretty good job in kind of a docudrama style of showing what really happened, which again is that, the British paratroop soldiers gunned down a crowd, trying to stop this demonstration, and, well, overreacted, and then the whole thing was covered up, even the British Army even issued medals to some, essentially the war criminals involved here, and again, that's one reason why I will never respect the Queen, because she, of course, had to give those medals. So that's one reason why. And, well, again, my sympathies have always, as a kid growing up, again, being Greek with, our history of resisting British imperialism that goes back to, the 1944 occupation and the whole history of British intervention in Greece over the decades, which is big. And so my sympathies was always with, the Irish nationalist cause in general. But Dennis, you were around for this, so what are your thoughts? I don't think we've ever gotten much into the Irish, the Northern Ireland troubles and all that, but in general, would you have any thoughts? What are your thoughts about the British, the whole Protestant versus Catholic thing, and the struggle that happened, all those decades ago? I think you should be muted, Dennis. So I think we can hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. I'm definitely on the side of the Irish. One of my favorite shows on WBAI is the Irish Show.
Oh, really? Okay.
And they're
who does that? Because
I've
never heard it.
Malachi McCord.
Right. Yeah, I met him on occasion. Yeah, he came to the Fight Back meetings.
John McDonough is the main force behind it.
Right. And of course, he's Frank McCourt's brother.
Right. That's exactly right. They're Republicans.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% on their side. I would say that ideologically I would be a Republican also. It's 800 years of British rule in Ireland, and Northern Ireland is like part of that whole process. And no, it's like no, I am against imperialism, period. And British imperialism was British and American imperialism were the top two imperialisms in the world.
Well, certainly historically, yeah.
And we have to, I would say that we have to oppose imperialism. We have to oppose U.S. and British imperialism in particular. And we need to be eco-socialists.
Yeah.
That's why Victor Wallace's books are on target.
Yeah.
About eco-socialism.
Right.
Our job is to change the world. That's what I think.
Well, that's a pretty tough task then. But yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And I should mention, actually one of my favorite courses, history courses ever, is actually an undergrad course I took at Queen's College, CUNY, with Professor Patrick O'Brien, that was on Irish history. And I remember his comment on, the role of the British in Ireland was that they always managed to screw things up somehow. So he wasn't so much on, him, again, well, from the name you can tell he was Irish himself, But he had to, again, he didn't just blame the British. Again, his idea was more that they were kind of just mess things up rather than they were, deliberately evil, which is one point of view. And certainly here with Bloody Sunday, as everyone should know, it was the greatest event ever for the IRA. It led to, hundreds of people joining because essentially it's John F. Kennedy's line that, if you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. But Ken, you were around for all this too. What thoughts do you have on the significance of Bloody Sunday for, not just Irish history, but, these kinds of struggles for nationalism and religious conflict, etc.
Well, it throws, on the other side of the world, down in India, there was an event where the British, I only know this from the movie Gandhi. I wasn't there. I don't know when it happened, but
47.
47, some, general with a pole up his rear end goes in and says, "Fire on the public," and he starts killing people.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's 34. That's the Amritsar massacre. Yeah.
Right, same kind of a thing.
And in fact, at the time, there was a quote at the time, and it's in the Paul Greengrass film, based on what somebody said at a press conference at the time from the marchers, that this was our Amritsar massacre. So they made a direct connection because there was the obvious parallel.
Right.
Because British soldiers shooting on,
And I'm working with a group that memorializes the events of Tiananmen Square for the last 30 years. And, and I think that at least the Northern Irish, who are mostly Catholic, should look deep in their hearts for some level of conciliation and forgiveness, because even Greece, I'm sure if you look back in history, Greece conquered lots of nations around the islands around it.
And not recently, but yeah, you go back.
Well, at some point in time.
Yes.
Within the last 1,000
almost
years.
Everybody's been,
Yeah, everybody's got some.
Even go back to the ancient Jews. Yeah, they were, Israel was going around, at least according to the Bible, even, you don't even have to go to the Bible. If you go around to histories of, the Roman era, Herod was going around conquering other people in the area.
That's
before
right.
the Romans showed up. So yeah, even the Jews can be imperialists.
That's right. And then you know what? A lot of men that are married and have faithful wives cheat on their wives sometimes. And some wives cheat on their husbands, Shit happens.
Yeah.
So I personally do not appreciate memorialization of tragedies, usually which are minuscule. You said 13 people got killed?
Yeah, well...
13 people get killed crossing the street every day in Manhattan.
Well, it's more, again, the effect that this...
Yeah, I know, but that's what's being steamed up, the effect, as opposed to the cooperative
Well, the
action.
Amritsar massacre, I think, was 300, so,
The one in India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
Tiananmen Square might have been up to 2,000, 200 or 2,000.
Right.
You can't tell. But these don't even compete with tsunamis or hurricane, volcanoes blowing up. Or COVID deaths. Right now, the COVID deaths are like 5 million people, right?
Yeah.
Worldwide. That's a lot
yeah,
of people.
Sacco said the anarchists didn't kill so many people, but it was a significant thing, their bomb throwing.
Right.
They, I don't think, ever killed more than a few hundred people, even worldwide. But, they killed the Tsar, among other people. So, they had a big impact.
I think it's an exploitation of human psychology.
Right.
Remember the Gipper. Remember the Gipper,
Terrorism is, it's about using violence to get a political result, among other things.
And a memorial over and over and over and over and over and over. Every year we're going to light candles and do a vigil. And it's like it's out of the past. It's not in the present. We're going to remember. So I can't support that. But I think what the British did in oppressing the Irish was detestable. And I always support the Irish fighting for their freedom, even today and always, because the Irish are a superior group.
You want to be open about that?
Yeah. They contributed a tremendous amount.
They certainly have been oppressed for.
They're not a notable group because they've been oppressed. They're a notable group because of what they've contributed.
Oh, sure,
culture.
No, the culture certainly, yeah.
You know, and all
well,
of that.
literature alone, right?
Literature and music, yeah, absolutely. So you know, and I just love the Irish. That's all. I'm prejudiced.
All right.
I got to say, that's one of the benefits of being prejudiced. You got somebody you like.
All right. Well,
so there
take
you
a
go.
clip.
I'll own up to that. Absolutely. Let's see what's next. I'll throw one in.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is something I'm having trouble with you New Yorkers confronting. So let me bring it up. Oh, I gotta share. Here we go.
Jason Rivera's funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral last Friday, where thousands upon thousands of police officers stood along Fifth Avenue, shoulder to shoulder, and someone believed that it was the perfect opportunity to threaten or harm police officers, and said that he would be watching and waiting for the next one. This morning, at least 2 police unions are condemning this disturbing video, and the NYPD tells me it's aware of the post, but said that at this point, there are no criminal charges that have been filed. The person is not under arrest. Pix 11 has reviewed the video, and the man announced his aspirations to allegedly harm those gathered for Wednesday's funeral for partner Wilbert Moore. As a result, the Detectives Union president is imploring the U.S. Attorney's Office to arrest that man on domestic federal terrorism charges, saying he's already facing legal troubles for a racially laced tirade against an officer here last year. In a statement, DEA President Paul DiGiacomo said, quote, "We need federal assistance now to stop a possible terrorist incident. The threat is real. The time for action is now." There were at least 2 other social media videos that surfaced and were flagged, one from an actress, another from a Brooklyn school teacher. Both have reportedly been fired from their jobs. At this point, the New Jersey man who made these threats online has not been arrested or charged. Reporting from Midtown, I'm Anthony DiLorenzo, Pix 11 News.
Okay, so...
Well, it sounds like he's going to be arrested shortly. So, I mean, just sounds like an idiot. I mean,
no, I'm not.
What did he expect? He's going to threaten cops and no legal consequences.
No, I'm not talking about that. I think the issue is the cops getting shot. Now, is the media causing an overreaction to police fatalities, or is it a situation in Manhattan?
Well, part of it is the whole, if it bleeds, it leads. Just a long time thing for especially local media, tendency. So naturally, this is what they think gets people to watch their, nightly news, evening news by playing this up. So there's a natural tendency to make a big deal out of these things. And then there's, one actually listening to a podcast from Yasha Levine, and he's moved to San Francisco. He was saying, one thought of his was, the possibility that the cops are essentially allowing crime to happen in order to, get people on their side. That they're kind of, they're not being as proactive against crime in order to help create a backlash against, the Black Lives Matter and say, we'll kind of let crime happen. So and then you want the cops to be, like they used to be and, be tough against crime. So again, who knows if, again, it's just one person's point of view, but I think it's quite possible that there's some kind of, cop stand down essentially as a reaction to, the pressure on them and, wanting. So I wonder about that in terms of the certainly, again, and we also know, of course, the crime is nowhere near the way it was, say, in the 80s or 70s, it's still consistently lower than, the worst, which in my opinion has a lot to do with them taking lead out of gasoline. I think the removal of a lot of lead that, actually damaged a lot of people that, gave them a predilection for crime, that their people were damaged by having too much lead in their blood. And that is shown to like their less inhibitions, and I think that contributed to, because again, you can see like there's like not quite a one-to-one correlation, but that's one argument. I mean, again, the crime is not up to where it was, say, in the really bad period, so it's still much lower. Again, there's also the question, well, how much of this is a result of economics, people turning to crime because they don't have a job or they're not making money, and then some of it is probably media hype. Certainly there's a lot of attention to those organized gangs going in and looting malls and stuff. That whenever that happens, they always make that's happened out in California a bunch of times, Ken, right? So I think whenever that happens, there's always the media always makes a big deal about it, right?
Okay, I can make some comment about
that.
Yeah. Well, there was another thing that happened in New York. I looked up and double checked. It was on the Upper East Side, a Rite Aid pharmacy. The guy had gone in and done a podcast about not much stuff on the counters. He came back and did another podcast. The counters were empty because there's no restraint on the shoplifters. So they came in and emptied the store.
Really?
And then Rite Aid is closing it down. So it has consequences.
Yeah.
And then if the neighborhoods are not safe enough for big box realtors to run, then they're going, segregation. Where's my Rite Aid? Where's my, there's no supermarkets here. So things go together. Let me finish.
Okay, Ken.
Remember, I have the superpower here.
Right.
If I can find it, whatever. There it is. There we go. Ba-da-ba, bing. So anyhow, why aren't I here? There we go. Okay, so the other aspect of this is this. Yes, crime is down, but murders are up. And the murders that are hitting the news are people thrown in front of trains, cops shot in an ambush, and people shot for no reason sitting in their car or going out. It isn't robbery. It's just malicious murder. Maybe it's what they call hate crimes. So that's what's hitting the news. It isn't a question of economics, because they can go in and pilfer a store and nobody's going to stop them, as long as they don't take steaks that cost over $900. And they can take it and walk out. Nobody's going to stop them. It's not a question of food. It's a question of malicious intent to cause harm or death. And when it's random, you don't have to have a high incidence. You only need 3 or 4 or 5 incidents to put everybody in fear. We just went through this whole COVID thing. Your chances of dying are 0.1% if you're under 60. But everybody stopped working. Everybody put on masks. And everybody got vaccines. And the chance of dying is 1 in 10,000. And so, so it's the same way with murder. Sure, only 5 guys got murdered, but the next one could be somebody I know. So it has significance on the nature of a society, of whether or not they're comfortable, whether they feel they can just go walk down the street la-di-da-di-da-da-da without wearing a bulletproof vest. Actually, that's a good idea. I think I'm going to invest in bulletproof vest manufacturers. So that's that they sell in New York. And that's the end of that. And let's see what Dennis thinks about the shootings in New York.
I think Dennis
Come on,
has left us for a minute. I don't see.
Oh, he left for a minute? Okay. Great. So if he's, Dennis is, yeah, it's
left the building.
He's not there, left the property. So I have another one that I think is pretty good. Let me show that, and then we'll go back to you. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, let me see if I got to go here to get it. I got to pull it up and then share it. There we go. I haven't really, I'll tell you the truth, let me confess. I haven't watched this.
Most, diplomatically speaking, absurd country in the world. Born from the ashes of the last Qing Empire, it rose to global power status, fighting alongside Allied forces against the Japanese during World War II. Until 1971, it held a powerful seat in the United Nations Security Council, but is now only formally recognized by 14 member states, like Eswatini and Nauru. Though at one point, the Republic of China had governed over the majority of East Asia, it is now confined to the main island of Formosa and several smaller islets off the coast of Fujian in the People's Republic of China. Some Taiwanese territories, like Kinmen and Matsu, lie only a short distance from China's mainland shores, while other islands, like Taiping, lie in the middle of the South China Sea. In all, Taiwan's landmass is about 0.37% of that of its larger neighbor, and its population of 23 million pales in comparison to China's 1.4 billion. The latest chapter in the Republic's history began with Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang government's retreat to the island of Taiwan, then Formosa, from Mao's Revolutionary People's Liberation Army on the Chinese mainland. Ever since, Taiwan has been home to the self-proclaimed Republic of China, which retains its claims over the Chinese mainland and several territories historically controlled by the Qing dynasty. This political tension between the two Chinas has shaped the region's history ever since. Over time, Taiwan underwent a process of democratization and now considers itself a sovereign and independent state. However, the PRC maintains its position that Taiwan is a rebel province and does not recognize its elected governments. The 2005 anti-succession law that formalized the PRC's ability to use military means against Taiwan states there is only one China in the world. Both the mainland and Taiwan belong to one China. China's foreign policy pivots around its territorial unity, not even recognizing Taiwan's de facto and declared succession. This concept is, of course, important for every country. However, for China, this is especially deep-rooted in its history. The century of humiliation under imperial and republican control of China is viewed as one of the weakest periods in China's long history. Refusing any further placation and projecting an image of strength became a tenet of Chinese foreign policy, which it still maintains to this day. Chinese elites stated their preference for a path to peaceful reunification, a sentiment which culminated in the creation of unification councils in both the PRC and the Republic of China in the 1990s. However, in the early 2000s, unification talks went south. China's efforts to break the one country, two systems principle in Hong Kong cemented the perception of irreconcilable interests across each side of the strait. The region's rapid remilitarization by both sides has renewed decades-old concerns of possible invasion of Taiwan. An example is the higher number of PLA jets passing through Taiwan's air defense identification zone. While these zones should not be mistaken for the country's air and sea territorial area, China's incursion upon them has been considered a threat to Taiwan's national security that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said could undermine regional peace and stability. But why is Taiwan such a strategic objective for China? Political perspective aside, it is security deficiencies that motivate the Chinese government to bring the island under control. From Beijing's perspective, Taiwan presents an invaluable strategic position in the East China Sea for its maritime border. China's external security strategy pivots around the securitization of the first island chain, beginning at the southern tip of Kyushu, stretching down the island of Borneo. The area is not only essential for China's foreign and border security, but also for the defense of other countries, including Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and even the US. For more information on what this zone strategy means for Japan, you can check out my other video on the Japanese First Island Maritime Strategy. Two main factors dictate China's reliance on Taiwan and the First Island chain. First, China lacks strategic depth between its coastal areas and the reach of its regional adversaries' weapons. Taiwan creates a pocket of insecurity on the vital Chinese coast, pushing inwards against China's defense lines. The majority of the country's population lives along the coastline. That's as much as 60% of its 1.4 billion citizens. Major port cities like Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen are not only home to tens of millions of people, but also are central parts of China's export-driven economy. Of the top 10 GDP-producing provinces in China, 8 are on the coast, and would therefore be very close to any cross-strait confrontation. Only around 100 miles, or 161 kilometers, separate the PRC's coast from Taiwan's airbases. Taiwanese missiles and jets could theoretically threaten China's major coastal areas like Shanghai and Hong Kong. That's also why the US never sold any long-range air superiority jets like the F-15 or aerial refueling capabilities to its Taiwanese ally, for fear of unnecessarily provoking an already wary China. Second, the First Island chain drastically hinders the PRC's expansion into the Pacific Ocean, which curbs China's capabilities to project power and deter foreign intervention in the region as a whole. Its three major military ports of Qingdao, Ningbo, and Changjiang all have limited access into the Pacific, making any routes easily targetable by enemy forces. For instance, PLAN squadrons sailing from Taiwan would be less observable by China's regional competitors, and could theoretically sail undetected into the Pacific, expanding its deterrence and attack capabilities while reducing the predictability of its pathways. It comes as no surprise then that the Chinese and Russian navies have begun increasingly bigger exercises in past years. Most recent joint maneuvers, taking place from the 17th of October to the 23rd, circled the Pacific coast of Japan and sent a clear message to Tokyo and the US 7th Fleet Command, based in Yokosuka, that China potentially represents a threat to Japan. Thus, control over this island chain, of which Taiwan is the most important link, has advantages for both parties. For the US and Japan, the First Island chain is critical in their China containment strategy, whereas for China, these islands are essential in securing its border, protecting its sovereignty, preventing US collusion, and creating a buffer zone between its shores and its adversaries. So, if Taiwan is so significant, why won't the PRC invade the island? The first reason why China won't invade Taiwan lies in President Xi's speeches and political interests. His publicized threats, like his pledge to reunify Taiwan by smashing any independence plot, or a reunification by 2049 with all necessary means, are signs of deteriorating relations, but not an actual military intent, instead aiming to intimidate Taiwan and its partners in the face of an emboldened ROC. This narrative is a continuation of Xi's decade-long propaganda push around the revival of the Chinese image. Increasing verbal attacks against Taiwan is a way to bolster Xi's international image and consolidate power. As China's GDP growth slowed from 7.9% in the beginning of his term to 6% in 2019, down to 2.3% after the COVID-19 pandemic, President Xi's propaganda has been focused on presenting an image of a strong, capable China, especially against foreign powers. Portraying Chinese forces involved in heroic operations, like in anti-piracy engagements in the Gulf of Aden, taking a hardline stance in trade talks with America, or in China's historic efforts against Japan in World War II. Actually acting on any threat to invade Taiwan would risk breaking this aura of invincibility that is vital to the CCP's national image at home and abroad. Invasions are difficult, amphibious operations even more so. This type of operation involves far more moving parts compared to other military maneuvers, entailing the use of sea, air, land, and even space assets, the utilization and application of which would be new and unprecedented in the modern history of warfare. On top of that, the People's Liberation Navy lacks actual major combat experience, the last being in 1894 in the Yalu River Battle. In the modern era, amphibious warfare is already a pretty difficult feat, especially in an area as contended as the Taiwan Strait, and would involve incredible coordination of resources. Also, unfavorable conditions like typhoons and strong tidal currents drastically reduce the windows of time where such operations could be feasible. The majority of Taiwanese territory is covered by insurmountable forests and mountains, some almost 13,000 feet tall, reducing the amount of potential landing points in any invasion. Additionally, troops and machines need to be constantly resupplied with food, water, ammunition, and fuel in complex resupply operations that can leave positions exposed. Longer and more complex supply lines multiply this risk exponentially. For example, such operations accounted for the majority of U.S. casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. Any attempt on highly contested waters, such as those of the Taiwan Strait, expose the flank of major losses by anti-ship missiles and sea mines, and grant defenders a strong advantage. Additionally, China risks getting isolated internationally if it is perceived as violating international law, which it has already been accused of doing in its South China Sea claims. Disrupting its trade-dependent economy that accounted for 53% of its GDP in 2020 would mean China would lose precautious economic opportunities, which will cause an economic downturn in the world's largest manufacturer. An external risk of military action is only compounded by the political realities of East Asia. China lacks the firm alliances in the region which could protect, assist, or prevent any outside retaliation that could stem from an invasion of Taiwan. Russia's Pacific Fleet is limited in its movement inside the Sea of Japan, and North Korea and Pakistan are incapable of power projection in the Pacific. Compare this to the United States, which has spent decades building a deep web of military alliances and infrastructure in the region, meaning it can project power without any threat to its own population. Taiwan has built strategic partnerships through its strong relationships with the US and Japan. While American hesitation and strategic ambiguity might be mistaken as fragile commitment on the surface, Washington knows the strategic value of holding Taiwan, particularly in view of a possible confrontation with China. President Biden has continued selling military equipment and sending American instructors to train Taiwanese forces, a policy begun by the Trump administration. This is a sign of deteriorating U.S.-China relations and America's firm commitment to East Asia. Taipei's relationship with Washington means it can count on a number of regional partners. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India, Indonesia, and Singapore all share, to different degrees, the goal of containing China's perceived threat. This commonality of interests allows the U.S. to leverage on a coalition network, while China is left isolated in its immediate vicinity. Closer to home, Japan's relationship with Taiwan is essential on implementing its strategic posturing. Amid a perceived assertive Chinese expansionism in the Pacific, Japan's position shifted from an accommodating stance visible until the late 1990s to a more proactive one, embodied by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's administration. A main concern for Japan is losing its remote and secluded islets in the Nansei Shoto archipelago, anxiety aligned with a wider contest over the first island chain. If China took Taiwan, Japanese remote archipelagos would be under direct PLAN threat. That's why Japanese leaders have also publicly stated that in case of a military aggression, they would be sending forces to Taiwan's aid. However, it remains to be seen how much and to what degree Japanese forces will be able to take part in a defense of Taiwan. Japanese constitutional constraints are yet to be clarified, and the population is still majority against normalization. Perhaps Beijing's most unforeseen enemy in its fight against Taiwan is itself. Despite their contentious history and a growing rift between their forms of government, Taiwan and China have grown increasingly intertwined economies over the past decades. As a result, they have come to rely on each other for their own prosperity. For China, Taiwan is one of its largest sources of foreign investment. According to Taiwanese government figures, approved investment from Taiwan into China between 1991 and 2020 totaled $188 billion US. Additionally, cross-strait trade has become an increasingly important revenue source for both countries. In 2019, it was worth around $150 billion US. Nowhere was this reliance better demonstrated than in the 2020-2021 global semiconductor shortage. Taiwan has positioned itself as the largest chip and semiconductor manufacturers in the world. It has been estimated that Taiwanese companies produce around 84% of the world's most advanced chips under 5 nanometers. Semiconductor production can only begin after decades of investment, and these chips are not only used in smartphones and PCs, but also in most of the appliances that make the modern world work, from fridges to cars. This shortage saw the largest economies in the world scrambling at the whim of Taipei to feed their insatiable domestic demand for electronic goods. China would be well aware of the danger of cutting itself off from this critical modern market and the cost of disrupting the status quo for political motives. For China, any military invasion of Taiwan entails a huge political and economic risk. In the current political environment, an invasion would isolate China and its economy, suppressing, halting, or even reversing its growth and potentially threatening its government's very existence. However, a détente seems unlikely. Beijing and Taipei are guaranteed to be keeping a close eye on each other as the situation unfolds. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please consider...
Well, it's too bad Jim isn't here because, well, he would have plenty of comments. But, you know, hey, we at the New York Military Affairs Symposium have been discovering the whole Taiwan-China situation, and, you know, would they invade? What happens if they invade? We've been discussing that for more over a decade at this, probably 20 years at this point. So, you know, we've been through all the different arguments. You know, I tend personally to think that, well, China isn't ready to do it yet, even if they wanted to. Also, the Taiwanese they've been preparing for a Chinese invasion for, since 1949? So what, 70 years? Yeah, over 70 years at this point. And, you know, given the geography of Taiwan, they pretty much know where the PLA would land. You know, they prepared the beaches. They know how they would fight. Like they said, an amphibious invasion is one of the toughest things you can ever do, which is why a lot of them fail, like, say, Gallipoli, if you want an example of a disastrous amphibious invasion. But again, there are several others. You know, the successful ones, like, say, you know, Normandy for, you know, 1944, that require a huge amount of coordination, a huge amount of material, a lot of people, a lot of, you know, air, sea, and land power working together. It's not an easy thing. So, you know, it's going to be like if Putin invades Ukraine, it's a roll of the dice too. You never know. You're never certain of anything in war. It can go badly for you. So it's, you know, there's the whole famous line by Helmut von Moltke, you know, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So that would apply in any kind of conflict, invasion of Taiwan. So again, I don't see it happening, and especially when, you know, there's still a chance of a peaceful unification down the line, and I think still in the minds of the Communist Party that, you know, just naturally for economic reasons they'll wear them down, and Taiwan will wind up being incorporated, or maybe at some point Taiwan won't be as so important in their, you know. The only thing is, yeah, it would be a strategic gain to get Taiwan in terms of that whole first island chain. But, you know, there are a lot of risks too, especially economically and politically, to upsetting everything. But
yeah, let me ask you a question.
Kenny, since you watched the whole thing, yeah.
Let me ask you a question before we go to Dennis. Like the China, through private investors, but indirectly owned by the CCP, have invested in the U.S. Okay, or let's say there's been some cross investing, so they've invested in Taiwan.
Yeah.
If you get to belligerent military aggression, the U.S. government can seize anything they invested in here in the States.
Well, there's a danger in that.
I know, but they can freeze the accounts. They've done that with Iran, right?
Right, but you know.
I'm not. That's an added.
But they own. Remember that China owns, was it $2-3 trillion of our treasury bonds?
Right.
So they have leverage too. I mean, yeah. One of the interesting things is I was noticed a few. I think Michael Hudson was saying something about it, that Blackstone and the other big hedge funds, the place they're investing their money now is China again. They think China is the best investment in the world. So U.S. banks and U.S. Again, well, Goldman Sachs and the rest of them, they're happy to still. So, maybe, Lenin's line about, the capitalists are going to sell us the rope to hang them with is turning out to be true. Because literally, again, if you want to make a whole thing, evil's a communist China, well, the West is basically funding them and investing because they do get, China's, Biden's crowing about, we're going to have 5%. We had 5.7% GDP growth last year, but I think China's is going to have something like 8%. And of course, unlike the U.S., China, when they were saying, China only had 2% growth in 2020, that was in the middle that was in the middle of COVID when everybody else's economy was negative. So again, China in 2020 and 2022, they had some growth when basically the rest of the world was in decline. So they start from a better, a position above. If you're going to do that, again, this whole thing of Biden.
But what I'm leading to, what I'm
the U.S. is growing more, which is not even.
What I'm trying to inquire about is,
yeah,
does cross investment, investment from one side to the other, act as a deterrent to conflict?
Well, trade. It's more trade because I don't think China does the, compared to say like Japan in the 80s. I mean, Japan did a lot more investing in buying up of properties in the U.S., actually to their detriment. Like we can think, like who was it? Mitsubishi bought Rockefeller Center, and they lost a huge amount of money on those kinds of different Japanese corporations and those kinds of real estate deals in the end. So, because again, as Michael Hudson points out, it doesn't, if other countries come in and buy, American assets, they don't get control of it because, and the money, the fact that they have to basically buy dollars for everything means they're essentially subsidizing us. That's how, I think he correctly portrays it that, it's what he calls it's a dollar economy,
Okay, well,
because everybody has to buy oil and other important, you have to, in order to do trade, you got to convert your currency into dollars in order to buy anything worldwide. So essentially, our deficit is, Dennis, I think, has his, this is all in Michael Hudson's great book, Super Imperialism, which again explains how since we went off the gold standard, the world has been propping up the U.S. deficits by buying our dollars. Because they recycling them through, again, various transactions. And so the U.S., that's why the U.S. can run as much of a deficit as it wants, because everybody buys our dollars, and so we get our money back that way. If the U.S. buys Chinese goods, that gets, that comes back to us, because again, China, in order to buy those goods, China has to turn it all into dollars, and that's why again, China is moving towards using their own currency or their currency in combination with the euro or even the Russian ruble, because if they can break that, basically it's the U.S. will lose that economic power. In fact, again, there's some thought that, well, if the dollar is ever dropped as a reserve currency, that will lead to, the kind of hyperinflation of like, it could be as bad as Weimar Germany again, where your money become, where you're talking, hundreds of percent per day. Like, those old stories about how you had to go around with a wheelbarrow of Deutschmarks in order, and, you would, when you got your paycheck, you would rush out to buy goods because your money would be worthless basically by the end of the day. That's how much inflation it was. But, even lesser inflation, like stuff that's happened in Latin America, that could happen to us. And, that would kill, ordinary Americans. But we've done it to other countries. So,
Okay.
but again, I recommend everybody go read. Again, Dennis can probably comment more on this.
Well, yeah, could you tell me who is
Dennis,
Michael Hunt? Who is Michael Hunt?
Michael Hudson. He's an economist. For years he worked for Chase Manhattan and David Rockefeller. He's written quite a bit about, well, again, one thing again is what he calls super imperialism again is, which is one of those banned books that disappeared, but now he's putting out his own new edition of it. Again, it's basically about this idea that again this whole dollar recycling thing funds the U.S. empire. But also, again, the U.S. acts through organizations like the IMF and the World Bank to basically keep the world economically subservient to us. Like he points out how the World Bank basically keeps all other countries food insecure, keeps other countries from basically developing from being able to feed themselves with their own agriculture, and then flooding them with cheap American farm products. And then again, austerity. But again, he's also written quite a bit about the impact of debt on. And Dennis sent out his latest video that he did, where he's arguing now that the U.S. is really in quite a bit of a pickle economically, because obviously we're dealing. Well, we all know we're dealing with high inflation. But Hudson's argument is that, they can't fight inflation the way they normally would, which is to have the Fed raise interest rates. Because his argument is that if the Fed raises interest rates, that's going to cause a financial catastrophe. Because, well, we saw how actually just saying they were going to raise interest rates is what caused all the trouble in the financial markets last week. So his argument is the Fed has and the U.S. government has run out of things to do. So it's like, again, either they're going to just have to let inflation happen, in which case he thinks we could move back into the kind of stagflation that you guys went through in the 70s, where again you have, could have like 10% inflation and at the same time very little economic growth. I mean, you guys probably went through that, so you know what that was like. But again, to do the thing that was stopped again, to raise interest rates, Biden doesn't want to do that because it will crash the economy now, and he'll lose not only 2022, but he'll definitely lose 2024 because he'll be a bad economy. That's what leads to people losing elections. And again, he's not in great shape. Otherwise, in terms of what he's done politically. But Dennis, you saw the whole Michael Hudson's latest. What are your thoughts on what he's been saying recently?
Well, I always have to catch up to him. It takes time, and that film, that video was interrupted, and so I didn't quite get my view of things here. Well, I wasn't clear exactly what he was saying, but I could say something about the U.S. dollar is a reserve currency for the whole world. The key financially to defeating U.S. imperialism is to take the world off the dollar as a reserve currency. And both China and Russia are trying to get off the U.S. dollar. And one of the reasons that Gaddafi was killed, Gaddafi was hoarding gold, and he wanted to have a European, an African currency, and he had enough gold to guarantee whatever currency he wanted to use, to guarantee it in gold. And the reason the U.S. wanted to get rid of him was because of that. This is the key.
This is the book we were talking about, Ken. Again, Michael Hudson. Again, this is his new 3rd edition of the book. So again, very great book and well worth reading again to explain again how the U.S. economic empire really works. And he does some great work explaining the kind of historical roots of which go back to basically the end of the Second War.
Well, what he's talking about is the financial root of U.S. imperialism.
Okay, good. All right, you go first. Your hand. Ball's in your court, Alex. One more.
Okay. So let's talk about the report from Amnesty International, which I think we'll probably try and do a bit more with tomorrow when we have more time to get in depth. But this again is Amnesty International is joining, Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, in declaring Israel an apartheid government, apartheid state. So obviously that's rolling things internationally for Israel, and there have already the usual counterattack of claiming that now Amnesty or anti-Semites has started as well. But here, this is Al Jazeera commenting on this.
Amnesty International says Israel has built up an array of policies, laws, military coercion and economic and social discrimination that amounts to oppression and domination over Palestinians in the areas it controls. In short, it says, a system of apartheid.
We are here today to call on the international community to take resolute action against the crime of humanity being perpetrated in order to maintain the system of apartheid.
The report highlights last year's tensions over threatened displacements of Palestinians from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem and the military and communal violence that followed. It sets out a catalogue of instances and techniques whereby Palestinians have been displaced from land in Israel and in the occupied territories.
A settler has confiscated thousands of hectares while Palestinian shepherds can't graze their sheep. We want protection for our herders from the settlers.
But it goes much further back in Israel's history, analysing basic laws and long-term policies, it says, designed to guarantee a Jewish majority and Jewish control. Israel's government says that is an attempt to paint Israel itself as an inherently racist endeavour. In other words, it's an example of anti-Semitism.
Instead of seeking the truth, Amnesty echoes the same lies shared by terrorist organizations. 5 minutes of serious examination would be enough to know that the so-called facts in the report published by Amnesty this week are delusional and disconnected from reality.
Amnesty calls that a diversion.
We're not questioning the fact that there is an intent or a desire to create a Jewish state. What we are saying is that a Jewish state must respect and protect the right of all people on its territories.
This is the 3rd report within the last year accusing Israel of apartheid, after Israeli rights group B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch reached similar conclusions. Amnesty says the events here in Sheikh Jarrah in 2021 are further evidence of the conclusions that it was making in its report and evidence of the need for such work to be done. It also says that one of the first things that Israel can do to start unpicking what it calls an apartheid system is to protect and restore Palestinian homes such as these. Amnesty also wants the findings from this report used in investigations currently being undertaken in the International Criminal Court and at the United Nations. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
Right. So in the report again, Amnesty International said that there should be a case basically against Israel in the International Criminal Court, in part based on, again, their findings and a prosecution of Israel essentially for crimes against humanity, which is what apartheid is. So, of course, as you saw, again, there's the usual response from this, not just the Israeli government, but from the whole, Israeli lobby in various countries to smear Amnesty International as, this is all anti-Semitism, etc. But yeah, we're hearing all that. What are your thoughts, Ken?
Oh, I don't know. I want to hear the other side. I want to hear the 5 minutes. I want to hear the 5 minutes he's talking about. I haven't heard the counter arguments. So I know that, when you get a report, like I think I said this before the program, having done a lot of counseling, a certain amount of counseling, I discovered that
Yeah.
you have to hear the other side, because the wife comes in, she's got a black eye, and the husband comes in and says, well, she locked me in the closet and poured kerosene on it, lit it, and as I busted out the door, I might have hit her in the head. So you have to hear both sides. You can't go by one side. And I think Amnesty International has, they always take the side of the underdog, the smaller force, the smaller group, whether that smaller group is trying to retain control or gain control.
Well, they've
the underdog.
They've defended Israel in the past over things like they whitewashed some of the Israel's actions in Gaza in activists' opinion.
Well, then you can't trust them, can you?
Well, no, I mean, again, it makes the point here that they're taking an important, the fact that they're taking the step of openly opposing Israel. It's a big shift. Often Amnesty does essentially what governments want Amnesty. What Western governments they sometimes play the role of bad mouthing just the enemies of the West and ignoring the bad stuff the West does essentially. So
really?
They've had there you can definitely find
the major thing I know about Amnesty, because I used to be a member.
Yeah.
It was about 10 or 15 years ago. Somebody says, we got to stop with this thing. There basically would be letter campaigns to get governments to release political prisoners.
Right.
And then some young new people said, no, this is ridiculous. Freedom is based on economy and employment and racism. And
speaking of, I don't know if it's going on at KPFK, but
they opened up their doors.
Thing about Leonard Peltier, that's being brought up again because I guess he's up for parole or something like that. So I think at BAI they're making among not just that, Chris Hedges did a whole program with his lawyer on RT, so that's being brought up as an issue now. And I think he should, of course. My thought on him has always been, since I saw that the Robert Redford documentary they did, whatever Crisis at Ogal or whatever it was, that he was basically framed by the FBI. And
sure.
He should never have been put in jail. He's an innocent man, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I don't know why somebody hasn't pardoned him.
Well, that's what they're looking for. Biden to commute his sentence. That's one of the things they're trying to. Because he's a federal prisoner since he.
Well, anyhow, so what I'm saying is Amnesty and the ACLU opened up to broaden the scope of what they're interested in. ACLU used to be basically tightly controlled on the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. But now they're just whatever they're told to do.
And they've shifted somewhat because people were pointing out, before COVID, their policy on medical mandates was that it was a violation of your bodily autonomy.
Yeah,
but during now, they
gave up.
They got a supportive mandate, so they kind of did a 180 on that.
That's right. They gave up. They no longer endear my respect.
Yeah, no. I mean,
they just follow the money and follow the news, and they do what's politically correct, quote unquote. They don't stand up for principles.
If we haven't heard Dennis talk about
the ACLU has walked away.
Now Israel too.
Okay, but I'm just done. I'm going to talk about the ACLU. They walked away from integrity of standing on issues. They only defend people on the left. They don't defend people whose civil liberties are violated on the right. They've said nothing about people being taken off Twitter or YouTube. Nothing, not a word, and so forth. You know, just the left. And there you go. They flipped their position on the mandate, which is obviously, you know, if you're civil rights, you stand for no censorship and no mandates unless it's an extreme emergency. Okay, hey, yeah, let's go to Dennis on, what are we talking about? Now I forgot, I got all hot.
Amnesty International's report
Oh,
on
right, yeah.
Israeli apartheid. Yeah.
Yeah, you want me to comment?
Yeah. Israeli apartheid.
Israel is an apartheid state.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I think.
It's a good place to visit.
They're what you call a settler colonial state. They took over somebody else's land, and they're now trying to eliminate them. They really want the Palestinians not to live in Palestine anymore. And that's what they're trying to do. They're doing what the U.S. did in the 19th century against the Indians. And I think we should not allow that to happen. And
okay.
Right. Well, again, something we can discuss more tomorrow in detail, because obviously there's has been and going to be more reporting on this, as you know.
Okay, so we got
Get to the
15
details
minutes.
of what the report says and so on. When we have more people too.
Oh, I got am I muted? No. I got a short clip that's 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, do it,
So
and then we can close.
Throw this in, and then we can close. Let's see what this sounds like.
Under pressure. And I'm getting, you know, all of the mail from folks and the very real anger.
Trying to backtrack and apologize after making controversial comments Monday.
So if you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race.
It happened during a debate on The View over the banning of Mouse, a graphic novel on the horrors of the Holocaust by a Tennessee school board.
It's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man.
But it's about white supremacy.
But these are two white groups of people.
The outcry was swift, with many pointing out the Nazis used racist propaganda during the Holocaust. The head of the Anti-Defamation League tweeting, "The Holocaust was about the Nazis' systematic annihilation of the Jewish people who they deemed to be an inferior race." Goldberg taking to Twitter to explain. On today's show, I said that the Holocaust was not about race, but about man's inhumanity to man. I should have said it's about both. Adding, the Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I have caused. Later weighing in further during a Stephen Colbert appearance.
When you talk about being a racist, I was saying you can't call this racism. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. People were very angry, and they said, no, we are a race. And I understand. I understand. I felt differently. I respect everything everyone is saying to me, and I don't want to fake apologize. You know, I'm very upset about that people are misunderstood what I was saying.
Goldberg has a history of controversial moments, including defending Bill Cosby on The View, which she later retracted, now apologizing and saying she will approach discussions around the Holocaust with more consideration.
I will work hard not to think that way again.
NBC News has reached out to Goldberg and The View, but we have not yet heard back. Guys, back to you.
All right, Miguel, thank you.
Okie doke, there we go.
Well, I guess we can look forward to more of the Whoopi Goldberg apology tour. You know, like back when, remember, Michael Richards had his whole racist comments and did that. Right. But yeah, like they said, they didn't mention. Didn't she also have like a blackface thing when she was dating Ted?
Oh, right. That's right.
So you know, it's not the first time. You know, well. And of course, there are other cases, especially again, unfortunately, African Americans. Remember Jesse Jackson and his Town comments? What was that, 88?
Yeah.
Got him into a lot of trouble.
They just blow a lot. Well, there must be some kind of a lobby. I don't know who's part of it that overreacts anytime somebody says the word Holocaust. This whole YouTube will be banned because I said Holocaust.
Right.
You know, it's hypercritical about any complaints about Israel.
Norman Finkelstein has
actually, when people criticize George Soros, they say that's anti-Semitic, and the state of Israel has criticized George Soros. You know, so it's sort of like it's just the media. The media is crazy.
Yeah.
The media pushes it to extremes.
Well,
But I do want to point out, 1 second, this is very important news. 1 second, let me just get it. There it is. I saw this somewhere. Whoopi Goldberg's net worth is $45 million.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So.
Why, they probably pay her millions for being on The View every year, right?
You know what I saw? That
not as much as Rachel or anything.
Rachel Maddow gets like $30 million a year.
Yeah. So he has like 5,000 a minute or some crazy number.
Yeah, she's cute. I like her, but you know, I think certain parts of our society, people are getting too much money, and these are paid. These are like W-2 workers. W-2, you know, or like executives.
Well, we're becoming a more unequal society.
Yeah. The Gini index is going out the roof.
No, the ugly show essentially was the billionaires essentially took about 3 trillion or 4 trillion from the poorest Americans.
Yeah.
It's like they gained like 3 something trillion, and that's about the same amount that you know, the bottom 50% is lost in all this.
Yeah, there should be some, you know, the government, I think the government on all tiers has been negligent in implementing antitrust laws and what's called, you know, extortion, taking advantage of a calamity and charging high rent. What do they call it?
No, there's
a name for that.
I forget who. There's one guy who did a good. He was on Democracy Now. He did a whole book on basically COVID profiteering. That's supposed to be good. That I'm waiting.
Right.
That I'm waiting to get from the library. It's on my quay.
Oh, okay, all right.
I forget the guy's name, but it's.
Okay, well, this showtime went pretty fast.
Yeah.
So let's say goodnight to everybody, Alex, and just bring it to a close, and that'll be it.
All right. So this has been the February 1st edition of Going Viral. We had Victor Walis on before. I'm Alex Stavropoulos, and we also had Ken Aaron and Dennis Goldstein. Everybody, hopefully, will have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time.